From Bitcoin, blockchain or distributed ledger technology to cryptocurrencies, tokens and initial coin offerings, it seems everyone involved has something to say, but can you really trust their advice? One man's had enough of weasel words and charlatans and is ready to give you impartial, independent analysis. With digestible blockchain bites, ICO analysis and need-to-know news on cryptocurrencies, author, speaker, transparency and clarity advocate, and award-winning software innovator, Barry James brings you Radio ICO.
Hello, I'm Barry James again, and welcome to ICO Radio Blockchain Bites. And today we're turning the tables again. So today, my inquisitor is also a good friend of mine because she's one of the pioneers of crowdfunding, actually, in the UK. But by profession as a journalist, so I'm, wondering what's going to happen here. But not one who's spent a lot of time with Bitcoin and cryptology and ICOs just yet. Is that right? It's Michelle Rodger, one of the founders of one of the early platforms. Hi, Michelle.
Yes, you're absolutely right. I'm coming to all of this as I think what I'd like to call myself is a curious novice. So I've got really little knowledge other than what I've read over the past few weeks. I've dipped in and out over the past few years, bookmarked so many articles that I want to read, but haven't actually got in amongst it properly yet. And I know from talking to you that I need to immerse myself to really get to grips with it. But I think, unlike Alice in Wonderland, I'm a bit trepid about going down that rabbit hole, which is, I believe, the only way to understand Bitcoin, blockchain, ICOs, and cryptocurrencies. I reckon I could be there for months. Yeah. So I'm hoping that today, if you can talk me through in layman's terms here and explain for me and listeners like me who are literally just tiptoeing around the edges at the moment, keen to get in, but testing the waters, as we should say.
Yeah, would love to. And by the way, you're far from alone, which is actually why we started this, because we know it's not something that you can, get your head around in a session, or probably not even in a day session. In fact, I'm sure not. That's why they call it going down the rabbit hole. I had a conversation earlier this week with, well, he better be not be identified, but a fairly senior public figure who has been avoiding me, it turns out, for a little while. And I said, when I actually spoke to him, he said, I sat myself down the other day and asked why I'd been avoiding Barry James, and he said, I realized it's because I really still haven't got my head around this blockchain stuff. So
I think I know who you might mean.
Yeah, I think you do, but we'll not embarrass the
absolutely not.
Okay, but so what would you like to ask first?
I want to know, in the simplest terms possible, please, what is a cryptocurrency?
Okay, so it's basically online money. So it's a coin that has its existence.
A coin that's online?
Yeah, it's a coin that's online. That's the simplest explanation. So
it exists?
It exists. It has a reality, but a reality in bits and bytes.
Okay.
And the reason it's important as an innovation is it was thought to be impossible until someone actually managed to achieve it, and we can go into that if you like, why it was thought to be impossible and where it came from.
Yes, please.
Okay, so the inventor of the technology is called blockchain, is an unknown figure. Basically, it may be a group of people, but known by the name of Satoshi Nakamoto, who clearly decided that they didn't want the publicity or the risk that goes with that in being the person who reinvented money. I mean, they obviously took this very seriously. But prior to that, we had what became known as the double spending problem. What's the double spending problem? Well, this was the thing that stopped online money working, why we had to start attaching our bank accounts in various ways, and all that's gone with that in the creation of the whole of e-commerce and so on. So if I'm in your presence, I can pick up, I've got a coin here, and say, I'll buy this off you. Here's the coin. Thank you very much. And we do a transaction. You can't do that across the internet. You've got to use a bank account or PayPal or something like that. So that's what a cryptocurrency is for. And as I say, the blockchain technology, which has since been found to have other revolutionary capabilities, because it kind of changes what's possible. It changes the rules. It changes what the internet is capable of delivering and doing. But it was invented in order to solve that problem, so that you could have a digital property that was like a physical property, in that when I hand it to you, you're the only one who's got it. Now, if I send you a photograph of a pound coin or a £10 note, and even if I promise to erase that from my computer, there's nothing to stop me not doing that, or you duplicating it. That's the problem that's solved. Okay, that's the double spending problem.
Right. Okay. So BitCoin would have been the first example, really, of the cryptocurrency. What's BitCoin?
So BitCoin, is the first cryptocurrency. So it all came in a bit of a rush, right? About 10 years ago. And it came in the wake of the banking crash. And a lot of people think that's not unconnected. Satoshi Nakamoto is out there somewhere. Some people think they know who he is, and could probably tell us. But all the indications are that actually they wanted to create something that could go around the banking system, but was secure and self-regulating. So
not at the mercy of greedy bankers.
Yeah, and actually, if you read, and it's surprisingly easy to read for a white paper, but if you read the document that was put together, they put together, that's the intent. He wanted to create something that wasn't dependent on the banks, that was free and fair, that was public infrastructure, if you like, in the same way that any other currency is a kind of public infrastructure. So blockchain was created in order to make Bitcoin a reality, which it did, and obviously now is the best known cryptocurrency. However, it's not the only one. There's now thousands of cryptocurrency. So Bitcoin's the first cryptocurrency, the first currency that you could use online, and at least in principle, any two people anywhere in the world can transact without need of help from any third party.
Okay, so where does the value come from when a cryptocurrency is born? How can Bitcoin be worth billions?
It's a really, really good question. And one of the reasons why cryptocurrencies are so difficult, and blockchain is so difficult to understand, is not only does it kind of change the rules, the laws that we kind of thought of as fundamental, but it also opens questions we don't normally ask. So I think to if you'll indulge me, this is going to be quite a long answer, but I think the best way to answer that question is to answer the question first: where does value come from? Okay, so and how does it relate to money? And I go to the question of what money is. So let's do a little thought experiment. So when the bank loans money to someone, right? That money doesn't come from savers. It's kind of well known now. It's understood that money is, as it were, just spirited out of thin air. It's just a number on the ledger. That's one of the things a banking license allows you to do,
Mm-hmm.
right? So let's say you borrowed £10,000 from the bank, right? That's money created. Well, okay, money's supposed to reflect goods and value. Let's restrict it to goods for now because that makes it a little bit easier to think about it. But that means there's 10,000 pounds less worth, out there in the world, and you've effectively just devalued the currency. Okay, when you make that loan. So why would that not just be a bad idea? Well, it wouldn't be a bad idea if you were a farmer, for example. And
Tell me more. Okay.
And you needed that money to create something that had value. And I've chosen a farmer, but it could just as easily be someone who's making iPhones or something else that has real value. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So you're going to take that money, you're going to spend some of it on seed corn and hiring the equipment that you need to raise a crop that is worth more than £10,000. So actually, if you do that, you repay the money with interest, which you can do because you've made more money than you borrowed, and the economy overall gets richer because that food is, has a value. And as I say, I've chosen a farmer for simplicity. Basically as a token, money is a token representing value. So that's the first part of the answer. So the second part of the answer is, so what value does Bitcoin represent? Well, it's inevitably going to be a complex answer, but in principle, think about two things. First of all, that it is seeking to create something that makes the world many times more efficient. Okay, so the banking system, as we know, if you want to send money, it can be a very tortuous, long process, particularly if it's large amounts of money or you're moving it around the world, transacting and so on. We've just kind of got used to all of this, and tolls are extracted at every stage. If I can press a button and send an amount of money to you for a transaction, because trade creates value, it's well known and understood in economics that trade creates value. And increasing the velocity of trade also increases value. If I can do that without the friction and without the tolls, there's a value to that. In the same way, there's a value to the banking system itself.
Sure.
So let's think of it like that. One way of seeing the value is to say, okay, well, what's the value of the global banking system? Well, I can't tell you, but I know it's a huge, huge number, right? If you're going to go and buy up all those banks. Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe it's just a part of that.
Okay. I was chatting about Bitcoin to my daughter the other day. She's in her final year at university, and she mentioned that one of her friends was trying to get everyone to buy Bitcoin when she was in her 5th year at school. So that's 5 years ago just now. I think she might be regretting laughing at him now. Is it too late to get in and make a fortune?
That's a good question. It's certainly much better to be investing 5 years ago. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
But unless I can make this time machine work, that's not really much help. But is the money to be made now? Yes, there is. Will we see the rapid rises rather than sort of up and down volatility that we're getting right now? We saw rapid rises last year, times 10, times 17 at one point, and more. Will we see that again? Possibly. It's not beyond the bounds of probability. Or have we, settled at a plateau? Actually, I don't think anyone can tell you.
Okay.
I really don't. It's the nature of markets. If you think that we're at the beginning of the growth of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, then, there's a case to be made to say, well, actually, what's going to happen when this goes mainstream? It's going to expand.
Yeah.
And what's going to happen to the price? I think, obviously none of this is intended as investment advice, of course.
Of course, I understand.
Not advice. If you're going to go and get advice, if you're going to do any of this stuff, and particularly never ever, be risking money that you can't afford to lose on anything speculative, including this. But yeah, I don't think the show is necessarily over yet from the Bitcoin point of view, or the Ethereum, which is the second one that you might know about. It's kind of the more technologically advanced version, that's come along. That's programmable money. It's not just transactable online, it's programmable as well. We've got things called smart contracts built in. But as I said, there's thousands of cryptocurrencies. There's more cryptocurrencies now than there are ordinary currencies, or fiat currencies as they're known. There's 180 of those, and there's thousands of cryptocurrencies.
Wow. So you and I, we have a long shared passion for crowdfunding.
Yeah.
And particularly, I think the fact that it levels the playing field for female and ethnic minority entrepreneurs. We've written and published reports about that together. But it doesn't seem to have stretched as far as cryptocurrency. There was an article in the FT just a few days ago by Hannah Kuchler about the fact that Bitcoin in particular, but cryptocurrency in general, is clearly male-dominated. Why do you think that's the case?
I think it stems from STEM, in the sense that it's well known that girls and women are just as capable of doing science and technology and engineering as boys and men. However, they're vastly unrepresented, and that's a cultural change that we're just beginning to chew on right now. Whole elephant to eat, and therefore, and as a result of that, in geekdom, where all the blockchain folks live, it's populated not entirely, but almost entirely by blokes.
Yeah.
So you think of a geek, you usually think of a bloke, don't you? And that in itself is a problem.
Yes.
And I know there's good things happening to change that. And hi to all the girl geeks out there. Keep in touch. Get in touch. But I think it's a reflection of that news about this and interest in it has tended to circulate in those circles, and we're not even in the early adopter phase.
Yeah.
Currencies as yet. So and it's been incredibly difficult to get your head around this stuff. It's going to get easier. Not to go under the bonnet and understand it, but some of us are hoping to get better and better at enabling people to drive the car without having to be an engineer and know about what happens under the bonnet.
I get that. We've touched on blockchain and its role in all of this. To me, it's an innovation that seemingly knows no bounds. Can you share with us some examples of blockchain in action, examples that those of us not yet in the loop, so to speak, might recognise?
Yeah. Okay. So some really good examples of blockchain it's really good at helping create a market or a new market. So fundamentally, some people kind of refer to it as a digital ledger, a distributed digital ledger. It's really good at record keeping, and in fact, the records it keeps are effectively indestructible, immutable. So it can be public, but it can still be 100% secure, 100% immutable. So Filecoin is a good example of an application of blockchain technology. It's so what's Filecoin? Well, you may have used, you've probably seen Dropbox, which is
Mm-hmm.
a nice idea, and you pay a fee every month according to the amount of space you use, obviously. But I say obviously, but actually, wouldn't it be great if I've got unused space on my hard disk and unused space on my connection? Well, wouldn't you like to, wouldn't it be great if I could get paid for allowing some of that to be used, and just kind of, earn some money or pay for the balance or whatever? That's what Filecoin is doing. So it's using blockchain technology to secure stuff so that actually it's turning a one-sided market into a two-sided market. That's outside of the core stamping ground, if you like, of blockchain, which is a lot to do with payments and finance. Another iconic example of this is the blockchain's capability to do fractionalization. So what do I mean by that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a bit like, the revolution we've seen in the sharing economy. It relates to that, and it kind of takes it to the next level.
Okay.
Yeah. So, Uber, think Airbnb. But let's say I've got an asset, like, I don't know, maybe I own a Rembrandt and it's worth $1 million. And it sort of sits on my wall. And I'm very happy about that, and I wanted to continue sitting on my wall, but actually I could probably make better use of some of that money. So you can actually do this now. So you can actually say, well, actually, other people might like to own a piece of that Rembrandt for 3 or 5 years and benefit from the fact that they know about art and they think it's going to increase in value. So I could issue tokens to the value of, let's say, half of that $1 million, and lots of people could own them and trade them if they wanted to, because these things are, they have trading built into them.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of the functionality that comes with a coin, of course. It's intrinsically tradable. So I've got £500,000. I've still got my Rembrandts on the wall, and I think I can do better things with it than have it just invested in the art. And suddenly, an asset that was locking up that money isn't locking up that money anymore. It's being mobilized. And, from your crowdfunding background, that ownership motivates.
Yes.
So in lots of different scenarios, not particularly that one, but in lots of different scenarios, being able to have that kind of ownership in an asset, or completely shared ownership in an asset, is, it's very powerful in terms of extracting and creating more value.
I get it now. Thanks for that.
Mm.
So ICOs, let's look to ICOs for a minute.
Yeah.
So the Crowdfunding Centre, which you founded, is famed for the breadth and depth of the crowdfunding data captured. And I know that you're already tracking and analysing ICOs. So what are ICOs? And what can you share with us about the scale of this evolving sector? Okay,
so ICOs that stands for initial coin offering, but the term is a bit misleading.
Okay.
Think of it as a way of funding an idea, almost always a way of funding a blockchain idea. Okay, right. So it's from that point of view, it's a form of crowdfunding, but a form of crowdfunding like no other. Okay. So it's different in a number of important respects. The first one, and let's put it in scale first. More money by far went into ICOs last year than the whole of venture capital. Now, you and I know that crowdfunding, much as we love it and much as it's powerful, and it is, has never got anywhere near that. It's been, a much smaller, a tiny fraction of venture capital, probably a few percentage points. And the average ICO over the last year or so has been well over £10 million, $13 million. The biggest ones get up to $250+ million in value. So that should give you an idea of scale.
And speed as well, that they could, ICOs are so recent, to be able to be raising that amount of money in such a short amount of time.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And there have been around 1,500, more than 1,500, we think, of them. We see new ones every week, probably about 40, 50 every week. And as you say, we're tracking them, and that data will be made available in various ways. We're also, working hard on ways of helping the ecosystem and keeping it transparent, making it more transparent, in fact, and fair and so on. But yeah, it's roaring away. In fact, last year, around 6.5 billion, more than 6.5 billion was raised in ICOs that's been identified, and half of that was in the last 3 months of the year.
Wow. So, in which sectors is it taking hold the fastest and the firmest?
It is quite wide ranging, but it's say the core stamping ground is really payments and financial services, and increasingly, asset management, the kind of thing, fractionalization and so on we were talking about, because it's obvious that entrepreneurs, once they get their head around this, that they can then see direct applications for those things. But it's beginning to spread. So we're seeing applications in sport to create new ecosystems there, in the arts, and in technology. And there is more than one school of thought on this. Some people think that it's purely a blockchain thing, and it should only be funding blockchain projects. Others think that this is a form of crowdfunding, and
crowdfunding 2.0, I'm hearing.
Yeah, exactly. So it could be.
So how do they relate?
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could look at ICOs as, you'll remember what the dialogue was around equity crowdfunding 5, 6, 7 years ago. People talked about the Wild West, and exactly the same terminology is being used, unregulated, and not entirely without without reason. But it's really interesting. Just to give you a flash of some of the key differences. That rewards crowdfunding or seed crowdfunding is really great for products, and that's the sweet spot. And sometimes you can use it for services, but you can raise relatively small amounts of money, in the tens, hundreds of thousands.
Sure.
Equity crowdfunding is, selling shares in the company, and which is very different. So, can relate to a product or a service. And goes up to 2-3 million sometimes, not usually a lot more than that, and can only kind of work in circumstances where equity is a decent option. ICOs, as I say, go up to much larger figures, and the sweet spot for them is creating services, and particularly creating new decentralized ecosystems. So there's a kind of obvious join there somewhere, and a progression between those three that we're busily exploring, actually. And we're looking at projects which could benefit from a clever strategy that leverages two or more of those.
I think perhaps you might have saved quite a few of us from that rabbit hole. So thanks for that, Barry. Can we get down to what, that old thorny issue? You referenced it a moment ago, but regulation.
Yeah.
So I know from experience that regulators just love to jump in and enforce rules on financial services, more recently crowdfunding and fintech. what are the UK regulators doing or doing about Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies and ICOs?
Yeah, this is really interesting, and what's happening in America, the SEC, and the rest of the world is equally interesting because, if you look at this from a global point of view, there is a wide spread of different approaches. From China, where if you kind of zoom out and look at if you listen to the mood music, it's quite negative. Actually, if you zoom out, you can see very clearly that the Chinese government takes cryptocurrencies very seriously, takes their to the extent that they want to own them. So they're in the process of taking control of the exchanges. But actually, I'll come back to the UK and the US in a moment. But actually, this points to a really, really important, crucial point about cryptocurrencies. They're global. They're outside of the banking system, and they're outside of any particular government's control in the same way that the internet is. So even the Chinese and the American governments have, limited tools in terms of what they can do. They can control, if they're willing to, go there, their own population and what happens on their shores. But actually, ultimately, all they can do is to exclude the population from the market, the global market.
Okay.
So around the world, we're seeing a huge difference in approach. Some places, Singapore's an obvious one, are embracing this like mad, and seeing the potential. In the USA, we know kind of the politics there at the moment, and it's very USA centric, and likewise, what the SEC are doing is, I was tempted to use the word insane. I'll try and avoid it, but basically, they're making insupportable statements like there's no such thing as a crypto token that isn't a security, which is just clearly not true. Jay Clayton, the head of the SEC, and they are they're making very sort of heavy noises, but within the framework of the realization that actually, they're not in control of this, and already one of the markers on just about every ICO in the world, and ICOs tend to be global rather than national. A bit like seed crowdfunding rather than equity. In fact, they're invariably global as far as I can see. One of the markers on there is not in the USA. So, the path that the SEC are on is one of isolation from the world on this.
So, are the UK regulators being any more sensible?
The UK regulators are, compared to the SEC, absolutely yes. They are taking, it seems, a much more wait and see approach, and I think that it's fair to say they know that they don't know. I think one of the problems with when we had to raise quite a fight around equity crowdfunding for it to be given space and given the opportunity to innovate, I think it's fair to say that the FCA and the FSA before that kind of didn't quite get that they didn't understand it. If you see what I mean, they just didn't get the revolutionary nature of it. I think this time they get that they don't get it, and are kind of and I think the message that we managed to champion successfully, that regulation it's there to stop fraud, not to stop innovation, and innovation is crucial and should be supported, is still alive in there somewhere. So I'm sort of quite hopeful guarded, but hopeful that the recent history in terms of the support for fintech, and of course this is part of fintech, has become ingrained enough to want to understand it rather than just stamp it out.
Sure. You referenced some countries that are grasping the opportunities, and there's one in particular I'd like to talk to you about. I'm talking about Gibraltar and rock tokens here. So this is a great example of what can happen when you actually collaborate with regulators to support innovation, isn't it? Tell us about rock tokens.
Okay, well, Gibraltar are a prime example of a place, a territory that have realized that, blockchain, along with the internet, but, blockchain's taking it to a whole new level, and hyperconnectivity turns the established order on its head. What do I mean? I mean that agility, the ability to move quickly, to move flexibly, has become, at every level, right up to the level of internationally in countries and nations, a prime competitive advantage and survival advantage. So what Gibraltar have done is they've realized that they have, because they're so small, they have that kind of agility. So without getting too technical, they are part of the UK, but they're an independent territory and have the right to set their own regulations. And traditionally, that they're kind of not made too much use of that. But some very smart minds there realized quite early on that this was a huge opportunity for them. And what they've done is they've gone and said, well, actually, why wouldn't we create a blockchain exchange? Why wouldn't we create an exchange for blockchain tokens, coins, but not just coins, tokens that represent other things as well? So last year they announced the GBX, the Gibraltar Blockchain Exchange. This is the Gibraltar Stock Exchange, who've worked closely with their regulator to create regulation fit for the 21st century and the internet we're going to have with blockchain. And the ROC token, which launched this last week, is their own token, underpinning that effort. So, and it's a very I don't know whether you've heard the earlier episode on that when I interviewed the managing director Nick Cowan from Gibraltar, but there's a fuller description there. And in fact, I'll be talking to Nick about the ROC token and doing a full update on that in the next few days.
Interesting, because one of the things that struck me about that interview with Nick was his idea that he wanted to position Gibraltar as a leading fintech jurisdiction.
Yeah.
So providing space and possibly even resources to help fintechs go to Gibraltar to get access to development. He was talking about global best practices, standards, code of conduct, regulations, and opportunities to work with the government and the regulator. Now, to me, that is a small country who normally wouldn't be able to compete with the big countries in the world. This is a small country being outwardly looking and nimble and taking advantage because they can. What does this mean for larger countries, the ones who are being narrow-minded and trying to shut it down, like India and more recently in the past few days, France and Germany?
I'd be a little bit cautious about characterizing it quite like that, in that, one of the mantras that I talk about is that BitCoin is controversial and it's volatile as well. Blockchain is not. Okay, so even though there's a lot of scare stories and reports about Bitcoin being restricted in various ways, and it's not necessarily a good thing. It's far from the end of any of that story, really.
Mm-hmm.
And some restrictions, are more important than others. But to come back to the nub of your question, what does it mean for the big guys? It means you don't want to be a dinosaur. it means that if you've got the weight and bulk of 50 states of the United States and an arcane system overlaid with politics, as the SEC's, and the regulation system is, then you're going to have to work really, really hard to keep up. Anyone who thinks that isolation is a great idea in a globalized world has my sympathy.
Nicely put. Barry, you've often said before, and often written before, about the fact that we live in a society that is very unequal, where the existing institutions have all been built on that whole idea of win or lose, of in order for me to win, you've got to lose. How do you see Bitcoin and blockchain and ICOs changing that? I'm presuming for the better.
I think it's a really good question. Is it going to be for the better? What kind of a world are we headed for? And one of my favorite quotes, I'm sure you've heard me moot it before, is Buckminster Fuller, who said, we're called to be architects of our future, not its victims. And I think we could be either. And I think it depends not on the technology, but what we do with it. And this is one of the reasons why we're doing this. And Blockchain Bites, and I'm writing, a column for Real Business and so on, is we think that there are really important issues for people generally, and I don't like the terminology, but public policy, if you like. So the public understanding of, we're this fast-moving train we're all on. We're all on it. We can't get off it. Our governments can't take us off it. It's global. Where do we want it to take us? So the beatific vision, if you like, the place it could take us is a world where it's going to be reinvented. But that could be a much more equal world where all of those resources that flow out of blockchain, that flow out of AI, and so on, could be used to make best advantage of the most important, the most valuable and powerful resource that we've got, human beings and their creativity. We could be headed for a world, if we get this right, where we're empowering everyone who wants to have their own business, everyone who doesn't want to have their own business, to work in an environment that they find interesting and stimulating, and so on. The alternative is, the world that the incumbents will take us to, which incumbents always want what they've already got. They want to freeze things in stone, but it'll be worse. So one of the key questions we want to answer when we have our next parliamentary session, which is coming up, is, should blockchains that relate to public services, for example, should they be private or should they be public? Because there's a big difference between a public blockchain, like the one that's used, and underpins Ethereum and Bitcoin and so on, and a private blockchain. Just about every bank in the world now has their own blockchain lab, and guess what? They're working on private blockchains, not public ones, by and large. So should we be building this, and shouldn't governments and regulators and so on be looking at the architecture of the future and building the kind of economy, because the economy is the one we've had is pretty much obsolete. It becomes, increasingly obvious as we look towards the future and this new technology. So, my point is actually it could be either, but for us to get what we want, we need people to, to begin to understand the train we're on.
Sure. Its
possibilities and where it could take us, and start moving in those directions.
You mentioned businesses a moment ago. Say I'm a business owner. Do I need to know about this, or can I and engage with it, or can I just happily concentrate on the ways of making money that I've done so in the past?
Okay, well, I think there's a clue. I was just saying this is going to transform the economy, and obviously, as with my business owner hat on, the obvious questions are when, and how is it going to affect me? How is it going to affect my sector? And the answer is going to be significantly different from every sector. If I'm totally brutally honest, there's a range of opinions on how fast. So, while clearly blockchain technology is moving far faster than any other previous revolution, some people say it's foundational technology, so it's going to take 10 years before it reshapes things. Some of us look at the 1,500 ICO projects so far and counting, and think about when you start to think about the services, a lot of them are very ambitious services that are going to be delivered. Then it's difficult to sustain the argument. Things are going to start happening pretty quickly. But think about it like this: the people who, when the web and e-commerce came along, that did best tended to be those who were curious about it, who took time to get their head around it. They didn't necessarily act on day one, but they started understanding its implications and its possibilities early. And the people who lost their businesses or were overtaken by events tend to be the ones who didn't and who dragged their feet. So there's a lesson in that. And in fine, think of it like this: it's what a great opportunity if you could envision, if you can bring a vision to transform and decentralize, some aspect of your business sector, and become a leader in that. That's a real opportunity, particularly if an ICO could bring you 10 million, 100, 200 million that you would never get from a bank or anyone else in order to do it. That's a great opportunity. And also it's a threat as well, because if your chief competitor does that and their intentions aren't quite as good and pure as yours, well, you can imagine.
Barry, thank you. This has been so interesting. It really, really has. I'm looking forward to listening to more of your podcasts in the future. Who do you have coming on the show next week or the week after?
We've got quite a lot of the leading ICOs lined up. So watch this space, and we'll be getting that update from Gibraltar via Nick Cowan very soon. But let me just say and reiterate for everyone, and firstly, before I do, thank you, Michelle, for your questions. I've enjoyed talking about these things, but we want your questions. So please go to ICO Radio. That's ICORadio.io and click the Ask Our Experts button. We'll get you the answers, and if we haven't got them, we'll find an expert who will give you the answers. There's going to be lots more where this came from, and I'm sure we'll talk again in a little while. Thanks again, Michelle.
You're very welcome. Thanks, Barry.
Thanks a lot. Bye for now.
ICO Radio was brought to you by author, speaker, transparency and clarity advocate, and award-winning software innovator Barry James. Get in touch with the programme, put yourself or someone else forward as a guest. Visit iconewsdesk.com. And if you've enjoyed the show, please leave a review. And don't forget to subscribe to get your next insights and interviews from the ICO Radio podcast.